East Central has always been known as a neighborhood rich in culture and deeply rooted in African American history. At first glance, it's a place where residents live in peace and harmony, despite the common social and economic challenges. During the summer, the streets fill with the sound of children laughing as they play on the sidewalks, while parents gather near their homes, discussing the latest news and events. It's a neighborhood where most homes have been passed down through generations, and stories are told from one mouth to the next. The residents of East Central take great pride in their community. Here, everyone knows each other, greeting by name and frequently helping neighbors, whether it's supporting a family event or participating in community life. By the summer of 2012, life flowed as usual. East Central School was the heart of the community, a place where picnics, fairs, and charity events were held. It seemed like nothing could disturb the familiar rhythm of the neighborhood. Among the residents of East Central was one family that seemed to embody the ideal of a successful African-American household. Jerome Harrison, a 42-year-old developer, was known in the area as a self-made man. Born and raised in the same neighborhood, he had climbed the ladder of success through intelligence and hard work, becoming a respected businessman. Jerome was admired in both his professional life and in the community. He was known as a charismatic, ambitious man who never shied away from challenges. He often found himself at the center of attention at local events, where he was greeted with respect. His wife, Monica Harrison, was his opposite. She had left behind a career as an event planner to dedicate herself to her family. At 39 years old, she seemed the epitome of the perfect mother and homemaker, devoting her life to raising their children, 13-year-old Kayla and 8-year-old Jaden. Their home, located on a quiet street in East Central, was always the center of community activities. Monica organized dinner parties, participated in charity work, and helped the school arrange events. It seemed like this family had it all: a home, a career, and the respect of their community. By mid-July 2012, the atmosphere in the neighborhood remained calm and friendly. Summers in Atlanta were always hot, and local residents tried to spend more time outdoors. But behind the idyllic exterior, a tension was brewing that no one could notice. In the Harrison home, a growing sense of detachment had begun. Jerome was spending more time at work, citing important meetings and business deals, which he claimed were necessary to maintain their family's high standard of living. Monica, staying home with the children, felt increasingly weighed down by her daily responsibilities. She no longer saw in her husband the support that had once been present in their relationship. While everything seemed stable and prosperous on the outside, emotional emptiness took hold inside their home. Monica tried to hide her anxiety from neighbors and friends, not wanting to shatter the illusion of a perfect family. She kept up a smile in public, doing her best to avoid suspicion. In public, the Harrisons continued to participate in all the major events of the neighborhood. They regularly attended church services, took part in school activities, and their children were always in the spotlight. Kayla, as the eldest, was preparing for middle school, and Jaden was already participating in sports competitions. No one could have guessed that beneath the surface, this family was dealing with deep problems. A growing estrangement had developed between Jerome and Monica. Jerome frequently stayed late at the office and sometimes disappeared in the evenings, citing business meetings. Monica suspected that her husband was hiding something, but she had no concrete evidence. One day she found a message on his phone that raised her suspicions, but Jerome convincingly explained it as work-related. Reluctantly, Monica let it go, but her anxiety continued to build. Evenings, when the heat would subside, the streets of East Central came alive. Residents stepped outside, talking with neighbors and discussing the latest news. The Harrisons still maintained their facade. They often took walks with their children, and no one could suspect that their marriage was on the verge of collapse. But it was during this time that Jerome began spending more time away from home, claiming the need for late meetings with clients. He was a skilled speaker and always came up with believable excuses. However, Monica began spending more time alone at home, feeling as if her world was crumbling. She tried to maintain the illusion of a happy life, but found herself increasingly alone, contemplating the future. Meanwhile, Jerome became more immersed in his work, unaware that their relationship was teetering on the brink of disaster. This was the summer of 2012 for the Harrisons, a time of hidden secrets, mounting tension, and an impending catastrophe that would forever change their lives. In the spring of 2012, Jerome Harrison's career reached new heights. At 42, he had become one of the key figures in Atlanta's real estate market, particularly within the African American community in East Central. His rise to success was no easy feat. Born into a modest family, Jerome had always been determined to break free from poverty. He was known for his ambition, drive, and incredible negotiation skills. His charm and professionalism won the trust of both clients and colleagues. That spring, Jerome sealed one of his largest deals, developing a new residential complex. This event marked his final breakthrough into the top tier of business. However, this success came at a price. His workdays stretched into endless hours, and business dinners and meetings increasingly consumed time that could have been spent with his family. Monica, his wife, had long noticed that Jerome was coming home later and later, becoming more and more distant. As summer approached, Jerome became even more detached. His days started early and ended late at night. Monica often waited for him at dinner, but in most cases ate alone with the children. Even during the rare moments he was home, Jerome seemed preoccupied with work, constantly checking his phone or responding to emails. He explained it as a necessity to maintain their family's high standard of living, but Monica felt he was simply drifting away from her and the children. For several months, Monica had noticed that Jerome was becoming more withdrawn and irritable. Early in their marriage, he had always found time for family outings, shared dinners, and spending time with the children. But now even his physical presence brought no sense of closeness. Gradually, he became like a ghost in their home, as if the family was nothing more than background noise to him. Monica, once an energetic and ambitious woman, was losing herself in the daily grind. When she married Jerome, they both dreamed of a family and stability. She left behind a thriving career as an event planner, which had brought her joy and success, to focus on being a wife and mother. In the 2000s, Monica had been a rising star in her field, organizing events attended by celebrities, politicians, and business people. However, as the years passed, her life became increasingly consumed by household duties. When the children were younger, she didn't feel this so acutely. But by 2012, with Kayla a teenager and Jaden growing up, Monica often reflected on how her life had lost its meaning. She wanted to return to work, but Jerome insisted she stay home, saying they didn't need the money since his income covered all the family's needs. But for Monica, it wasn't about the money. It was about self-fulfillment. By the summer of 2012, emotional tension was growing in the Harrison household. Despite the outward appearance of happiness, every family member felt the hidden strain. Kayla, who turned 13 in June, began to notice her parents were talking less and less. The atmosphere at home grew cold, as if an unspoken weight hung over family dinners. Jaden, their 8-year-old son, was too young to understand what was happening, but even he began to sense changes in his parents' behavior. Monica spent more and more time alone, feeling lost. She tried to maintain harmony in the family by organizing family gatherings and celebrations, but Jerome almost always found excuses not to participate. His business had become his priority, and Monica was no longer the center of his universe as she had once been. Even though they still appeared to be the perfect couple in public, the house was filled with emotional distance and inner conflict. Outwardly, the Harrison home remained the picture of prosperity. Neighbors envied their successful lives, a beautiful home, Jerome's booming career, and Monica's active participation in the community and their children's lives. But behind closed doors, everything was different. Jerome began acting cold toward Monica, avoiding long conversations and emotional discussions. He often left for work, and when he returned, only talked about business, leaving Monica without attention or support. Monica tried to talk to him, to find a solution, but each attempt only led to Jerome's irritation. They found fewer and fewer topics of conversation, and even when Monica tried to address the issues between them, Jerome would withdraw into himself or ignore her completely. The tension in the house was becoming unbearable, and Monica began to question whether their marriage had a future. Day by day, the feeling of emotional loneliness became overwhelming. By mid-July, Jerome landed another major contract. Outwardly, he seemed pleased and confident, but inside he was consumed by work and constant stress. During this period, he was hardly ever home. Monica, exhausted by loneliness and misunderstanding, began to question the direction her life was heading. She sensed Jerome was hiding something, but couldn't pinpoint what it was. Her anxiety grew, and she began searching for answers. It was at this moment that the tension in their family reached a breaking point. With each passing day, the Harrisons drifted further apart, and the life they had once shared, which had seemed perfect, began to crumble at the seams. In May 2012, a young woman named Danielle Green moved to East Central. She was only 28, but her life experiences had made her more mature than her age would suggest. After recently going through a difficult divorce, Danielle sought a fresh start in this neighborhood, hoping for peace and stability. She quickly found work as a kindergarten teacher at the local daycare, where many neighborhood children, including Kayla and Jaden Harrison, attended. The local parents and her colleagues quickly grew fond of her due to her kind nature and warmth. She often stayed late with the kids, helped her coworkers with events, and paid individual attention to every child. Danielle's move was driven by her desire to escape her past. Her ex-husband had been abusive, leaving her with both emotional and financial scars. She had been fighting for custody of her 5-year-old son, Michael, while trying to rebuild her life. East Central became her chance for a fresh start. Her kindness and dedication did not go unnoticed, and by the end of May, she had earned a strong reputation with the daycare administration. In early June, East Central held a school fair, a big event that brought together all the local families. For the residents, it was an important social gathering that allowed them to meet with friends, colleagues, and neighbors while enjoying a sense of community and support. As a successful businessman and an influential figure in the area, Jerome Harrison couldn't miss such an event. It was at this fair that Jerome and Danielle's paths first crossed. Their meeting began with a simple act of courtesy. Jerome helped Danielle carry boxes of toys for the children. Nothing extraordinary, just a polite gesture. But there was something more in that gesture. Their conversation started neutrally and formally, but soon turned to more personal topics. Jerome shared stories about his children, Kayla and Jaden, while Danielle opened up about her divorce and the difficulties she had faced with her ex-husband. There was an immediate chemistry between them, a connection that both felt. For Jerome, this meeting was something new. Danielle, with her warmth and kindness, reminded him of how easy communication could be, free from the responsibilities of family and the stress of work. It was a breath of fresh air in his otherwise monotonous life. For Danielle, Jerome wasn't just a confident man, but a potential source of support. Her lonely life after the divorce had left her feeling vulnerable, and Jerome's attention made her feel wanted and protected. In the following weeks, Jerome and Danielle began to see each other more frequently at school events and meetings. Jerome started finding excuses to see her again. He justified his visits as necessary to discuss school matters, but in reality, he was looking for moments to be with her. Each conversation felt light and effortless, especially compared to the tense dialogues he had with Monica at home. For Danielle, this communication also became an escape from her loneliness. Her son Michael was too young for her to share her thoughts and feelings with, and Jerome filled the void left after her divorce. One evening, after a school event, they lingered longer than the others, discussing personal matters, the future, their fears, and Jerome even opened up about his marital struggles. This deepened their connection, and though neither openly acknowledged it, both began to realize that they were drawn to each other. By mid-July, their relationship had evolved. What began as friendly meetings turned into dinners for work, but soon it was clear that they both wanted more. One of the moments that changed everything came one evening when they met at a park where their children were playing. Danielle sat on a bench watching her son when Jerome joined her. They began talking about family life, and at some point their conversation became too personal. Jerome leaned in closer, their hands touched, and something more sparked between them. That first touch was a turning point. Their affair developed quickly but was kept strictly secret. Jerome couldn't risk his status in society or his family, and Danielle feared the scandal that could ruin her reputation. They started meeting in secluded spots, small cafes on the outskirts of the neighborhood, parks, and even rented hotel rooms. These meetings brought them adrenaline and a sense of novelty that was missing in their lives. Day by day, their passion grew, and neither could stop. However, their secret meetings couldn't go unnoticed for long. Some parents at the school began to suspect something strange about Danielle's sudden disappearances, and Jerome's neighbors noticed that he was frequently absent in the evenings. Despite this, they continued their affair, becoming more and more engrossed in each other, unaware that this would lead to catastrophic consequences. Thus, the summer of 2012 became a time of new emotions and dangerous secrets for Jerome and Danielle. Secrets that would soon surface and destroy not only their lives, but also Monica's. By mid-July 2012, the affair between Jerome Harrison and Danielle Green had reached a more complex level. Their relationship was no longer just about secret meetings. It had become a parallel life alongside their normal lives in East Central. Every time Jerome left home under the pretense of a business meeting or an evening stroll, he was heading to see Danielle. Their encounters became more frequent, and every moment spent together only deepened their emotional dependency on one another. Jerome began manipulating Monica, coming up with increasingly elaborate excuses for his absences. He claimed that his business required more time and attention, that deals were becoming more complicated, and that he had to meet with clients late into the night. In reality, he used these meetings as a cover for his secret relationship with Danielle. To him, she was a sort of escape from reality, a comfort from the family and work responsibilities that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Each excuse sounded less convincing to Monica, but Jerome became more skilled at hiding the truth. Danielle, in turn, began demanding more of Jerome's attention. For her, this affair was a way to forget her painful past. But with each passing day, she became more emotionally invested. She could no longer be satisfied with occasional meetings in cafes or hotels on the outskirts. She began to entertain thoughts of a future with Jerome and started hinting that their relationship deserved more. Danielle demanded that Jerome take more decisive steps, urging him to choose between her and his family. These demands began to strain their relationship. Despite his passion for Danielle, Jerome wasn't ready to destroy his family life for her. He started to feel pressure from all sides. At home from Monica, who increasingly noticed his distance, and from Danielle, who demanded more of his time. These constant internal conflicts began to take a toll on his mental state. He often felt guilty but couldn't break the cycle. By the end of August 2012, Monica started noticing sharp changes in Jerome's behavior. He was staying at work later, coming home much later than usual, and, even more concerning, was avoiding discussions about their personal life. His phone was always with him, and messages came more frequently, something Monica couldn't help but notice. She instinctively felt that something was wrong. Jerome was no longer the attentive husband he used to be. Every time she tried to talk to him, he avoided contact, responded coldly, or changed the subject altogether. Monica began finding the first pieces of evidence. One day, she discovered a receipt from a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, a place she and Jerome had never visited. Another time, she noticed that his phone often received new messages from an unfamiliar number, but Jerome quickly deleted them, claiming they were work-related. Gradually, her suspicions turned into an obsession. Monica spent more and more time thinking about what might be happening behind her back. She couldn't shake the feeling that her husband was hiding something. At the beginning of September, Monica made a decision that would change her life. She started following Jerome. One evening, when he said he was heading to yet another business meeting, Monica put on her coat, grabbed her keys, and quietly followed him. It was the first time she had taken such a step, and her heart raced with excitement and fear. She felt like the heroine of a detective novel, but every turn of the road only increased her anxiety. Her surveillance led her to see Jerome sitting in a cafe with another woman. Monica froze by the window, unable to believe her eyes. It was the same cafe where she had found the receipt weeks ago. Inside sat her husband, and across from him was a young woman Monica had never seen before. They were laughing, their hands touching, and the sight was like a dagger to Monica's heart. That scene became the turning point. That evening, her suspicions turned into paranoia. She returned home in shock but didn't confront Jerome. Now she knew the truth but didn't know what to do with it. Monica became obsessed with finding evidence that could confirm her suspicions. Her days and nights turned into a constant flow of thoughts about how she could expose Jerome and discover who this woman was. By October, the tension between Jerome and Monica had reached a new height. Monica could no longer hide her dissatisfaction. Her constant suspicions led to frequent arguments and accusations directed at Jerome. He continued to insist that everything was fine, but his excuses sounded less convincing with each passing day. Monica's trust in her husband was eroding, and her obsession with the truth was beginning to take a toll on her mental state. At the same time, Jerome started noticing changes in Monica. She had become distant and anxious, and he sensed her suspicions, but he couldn't understand how deeply she had already dug. Monica was no longer the woman he once knew. She retreated more and more into herself, and in her eyes he saw a determination to uncover his secrets, no matter the cost. Their marriage, once seemingly unbreakable, was on the verge of collapse. In early July 2012, Danielle Green began pressing Jerome to make a decision about their relationship. Previously, she had been content with occasional meetings and secret rendezvous, but now she needed more. She was tired of living a double life and was becoming increasingly emotionally dependent on Jerome. She could no longer settle for the role of the other woman. One evening, in a hotel room on the outskirts of Atlanta, Danielle gave Jerome an ultimatum. Danielle demanded that Jerome leave Monica and cut ties with her completely. She no longer wanted to remain in the shadows. If he didn't do it, she threatened to tell Monica everything. Her words came as a real shock to Jerome. He knew his relationship with Monica had long grown cold, but the idea of a complete break and destroying his family filled him with dread. His reputation in the East Central community and in business could be ruined in an instant. Jerome wasn't ready to lose what he had built over the years. Under Danielle's pressure, he reluctantly agreed to the break, but deep down, he knew he couldn't go through with it. He promised her he would talk to Monica, but at the same time, doubts crept into his mind. Jerome knew that losing his family would destroy his reputation in the community, where he was a successful businessman and a respected figure. He began feeling deep anxiety and nervousness, but couldn't admit to Danielle that his promise was more of an act of desperation than a true intention. Around the same time, something strange happened in Monica's life. After her suspicions about Jerome deepened, she began receiving anonymous messages. These messages were short but threatening. The first one arrived in mid-July. "Your secrets will come out if you don't stop." Monica couldn't understand what it meant, but instinctively she felt it was connected to her past, which she had carefully hidden from Jerome. Monica had kept a dark part of her life secret from her husband. In her youth, before meeting Jerome, she had been involved in a complicated situation that could have destroyed their marriage if the truth came out. Once, long before they met, she had been part of a case involving large-scale financial fraud, something she had never told Jerome about. Since then, she had believed that part of her life was buried for good. But now receiving this message, she felt her dark secrets might surface again. Each new message became more disturbing. "You can't hide. Time's up." Such phrases frightened her more and more. She began to suspect that Danielle might somehow be involved in this. Her suspicions weren't unfounded. She had seen Jerome interacting with Danielle and began to think that Danielle knew more than she appeared to. Perhaps she was seeking revenge by using Monica's past against her? Monica couldn't ignore these messages. Her fears turned into paranoia. She no longer just suspected Jerome of cheating. Now she felt a threat to her very existence. These threats seemed aimed at destroying her life and reputation. But she had no proof that Danielle was behind these messages. Everything was veiled, as if someone knew her darkest secrets and intended to ruin her. Jerome, for his part, was unaware of what was happening with Monica. He was focused on his own problems with Danielle and had no idea that his wife was fighting her own battle. For him, it was a period of internal conflict. On one hand, he wanted to keep his family and reputation, but on the other, he couldn't let go of Danielle, who had become more than just a temporary fling. She was a woman capable of destroying his life if he lost her. Unexpectedly for Monica, her paranoia intensified when she received a message containing personal information only she knew. "You know I'm right." These words were tied to an event that had happened many years ago. She realized that someone had thoroughly researched her past and began fearing that this information would reach Jerome. Monica had no choice but to start her own investigation. From that moment on, her goal changed. Now she not only wanted to uncover the truth about Jerome and his affair with Danielle, but also needed to protect her own future from being destroyed. She suspected that Danielle was behind it all, using every opportunity to ruin their lives. And now Monica was preparing to take decisive action. Thus, in July 2012, the conflict between Jerome, Danielle, and Monica reached a critical point. Each side was playing their own game, but none of them knew just how far it would go or what catastrophic consequences awaited. By the beginning of August 2012, the situation between Jerome and Danielle had reached a boiling point. Danielle, realizing that Jerome was wavering in his decision to leave Monica, began using more subtle methods of psychological pressure. She knew Jerome was afraid of losing his reputation and family, but couldn't let go of her. This internal conflict became her tool for manipulation. Danielle started planting the idea in Jerome's mind that their happiness could only be achieved if Monica was no longer in the picture. She used every meeting to reinforce this idea. At one of their encounters, she said, "We can't be together as long as Monica's around. She's keeping us from being happy." Under her influence, Jerome began to think more and more about her words. His mind was gradually drawn into a conflicting reality where he had to choose between two women, each representing something important to him. Danielle skillfully wove a web of manipulation. She constantly reminded him that their connection was unique and that he would never truly be happy with Monica. She played on his fears, suggesting that if he didn't take drastic measures, everything they had built could crumble in an instant. Jerome, already under immense pressure from both work and family, began to lose his ability to think critically. His thoughts were increasingly consumed by Danielle and her words. Meanwhile, Jerome noticed his mental state deteriorating. He frequently woke up in the middle of the night, unable to focus on work. Thoughts of Danielle consumed him. It seemed to him that she was right, that their love was doomed unless he took decisive action. Yet every time he returned home, Monica made him feel guilty and anxious. He avoided conversations with her, trying not to show his inner turmoil. The house was filled with a tense silence, which only intensified his inner torment. One night, while sitting in the kitchen, contemplating his next move, Jerome's phone died. It was a mundane event, but for Jerome, it became a catalyst. In that moment, he realized just how much his life depended on that device, on the constant messages from Danielle, her control over his time and thoughts. It seemed to him that she controlled his every step, and that began to frighten him. But he couldn't break the connection because she had become more than just an affair to him. Meanwhile, Monica, after months of suspicion and anxiety, began to realize that her husband was involved in something far more dangerous than just an affair. She had seen how Jerome had changed before her eyes. He had become distant, nervous, and was spending more and more time away from home. But her realization that Danielle wasn't just a mistress, but a manipulator came to her after one strange event. One day, Monica unexpectedly ran into Danielle at a grocery store. The moment their eyes met, Monica felt an inexplicable sense of threat. Danielle smiled at her as if nothing was wrong, but there was something sinister in that smile. Monica sensed that this woman posed a danger beyond mere rivalry. She started to realize that Danielle was somehow controlling her husband, but she didn't know how to prove it. Monica made a drastic decision: to hire a private investigator. She could no longer rely on her suspicions and vague assumptions. She needed real evidence that Danielle was weaving a web of deceit. Monica wanted to know everything about this woman's past, her motives, and most importantly, how far she was willing to go to win over Jerome. The detective got to work almost immediately. The first results of the investigation surprised Monica. It turned out that Danielle had already been involved in several strange situations related to her past. She had a turbulent history filled with manipulation and broken relationships. Her ex-husband, whom she divorced, claimed that Danielle had controlled his life to such an extent that he had to leave to save his mental health. This revelation shocked Monica. Now she knew Danielle was capable of much more, and this frightened her even more. After gathering the information, Monica realized that Danielle wasn't just manipulating Jerome. She was using him as part of her elaborate game. Monica became convinced that behind all of Danielle's actions was a carefully thought-out plan. She realized that her family was on the brink of disaster, and if she didn't take action, everything they had built could be destroyed. By the end of August 2012, the tension had reached its peak. Jerome was sinking deeper into his own dark thoughts, completely under Danielle's control. Meanwhile, Monica had uncovered Danielle's dark past, but now she faced a new challenge: how to use this information to save her family from the impending tragedy. On the evening of September 5th, 2012, with enough evidence gathered by her private investigator, Monica decided she needed to confront Danielle face to face. She was filled with anger and fear. Conversations with Jerome no longer yielded results. He avoided any discussions or simply ignored her suspicions. Monica felt she could no longer endure it. The detective had given her information that only solidified her resolve. Danielle had been involved in the death of her former husband, and this suspicion now signaled a greater danger to Monica. Monica arrived at Danielle's house in the dark. The house stood in a quiet part of East Central, isolated from the eyes of the neighbors. Monica hoped no one would be home, allowing her to confront Danielle one-on-one. But when she approached the door and entered without knocking, she was met with a scene she hadn't imagined. Jerome and Danielle were together. Their closeness, their laughter, it all made Monica freeze in place. At that moment, all of Monica's suppressed emotions exploded. She stormed into the room screaming, demanding an explanation. Danielle stood up, unfazed, and began confidently walking toward Monica, a smile on her face, ready for another manipulation. She knew Monica was already on edge and played on her fears and pain. During the tense confrontation between the three, unexpected secrets came to light. Relying on the information gathered by her detective, Monica accused Danielle of playing a role in her ex-husband's death. Coldly smirking, Danielle didn't deny the accusation, but rather confirmed it, stating that her ex-husband got what he deserved. This confession shocked Monica. Jerome, who had never heard this story before, was stunned. He suddenly realized that the woman he had trusted and planned a romantic future with was hiding far darker and more dangerous secrets than he had ever imagined. Danielle began to emotionally torment Monica, claiming that she now had full control over Jerome and that there was nothing Monica could do to stop her. She uttered the words that became the catalyst for what followed. "You've already lost him. One way or another, I always win." Danielle's words pushed Monica's emotions to the breaking point. Overcome with rage and betrayal, Monica lunged at Danielle. But Danielle was ready for this reaction. She swiftly dodged and in turn tried to push Monica, knocking her off balance. A fight broke out. Jerome, paralyzed by shock, couldn't intervene in time. In the heat of the struggle, Danielle grabbed a heavy candlestick from the shelf and attempted to strike Monica. Monica, in defense, reached for the nearest object, a letter opener lying on the table. In a moment of panic and fear, she wasn't fully aware of her actions. In a desperate attempt to fend off her attacker, she stabbed Danielle in the chest. It all happened so fast that Monica didn't immediately grasp what had occurred. Danielle staggered, her eyes wide with shock. She tried to take a step back, but her body weakened. Blood began to slowly drip onto the floor. Danielle fell to her knees and soon became motionless. A deafening silence filled the room. Jerome, finally snapping out of his daze, rushed to Danielle, but it was too late. Her pulse was gone, and the blood quickly spread across the floor. In a panic, he turned to Monica, who stood frozen in the corner, gripping the bloodied knife in her hand. Her face was twisted in horror at what she had done. She couldn't believe she had just killed someone. Both of them knew the situation had spiraled out of control, and now there was no turning back. Monica, still in shock, couldn't move. Jerome, realizing the deadly situation they were in, began to panic. He quickly tried to figure out how to hide the evidence, how to cover their tracks, but the more he thought about it, the clearer it became that they had run out of time. After several minutes of silence, Jerome realized there was no way to hide anything. Bloodstains, fingerprints, evidence of their presence. Everything pointed to their guilt. He grabbed his phone and with trembling hands dialed 911. His voice was cold and lifeless as he told the operator that there's been a murder. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance as Monica, sitting on the floor next to Danielle's body, finally realized the magnitude of the tragedy. What had begun as an attempt to uncover the truth and protect her family had ended in deadly consequences. On September 6, 2012, the day after Danielle Green's murder, the police began their official investigation. The crime scene at Danielle's house was thoroughly examined, and investigators immediately noticed many contradictions. At first glance, everything seemed like an act of self-defense on Monica's part. However, the evidence police started finding made them question what was really behind this tragedy. The first thing that stood out to the investigators was the signs of a violent struggle, indicating a fierce fight, but they also found items belonging to Danielle that suggested Monica had been tracking her for some time. Among Danielle's personal belongings was a file containing documents and photographs showing that Monica had been gathering evidence against her long before the tragedy. This led police to consider the possibility that Monica hadn't acted out of pure rage, but had been preparing for a confrontation with Danielle. The police also found evidence suggesting that Monica suspected Danielle not only of having an affair with Jerome, but also of something darker. Internal documents found in Danielle's home contained suspicious financial transactions that at first glance seemed unrelated to the case. However, further investigation revealed that these transactions were directly tied to real estate deals involving Jerome. As the investigation deepened, police began gathering information on Jerome. At first, he seemed like a bystander, a man caught between two women, but soon investigators realized his role was much more complex. Documents surfaced indicating that Jerome had been leading a double life, not only in his personal relationships, but also in his professional life. Police discovered that Jerome was involved in shady real estate deals. These deals included document manipulation, tax evasion, and collaborations with illegal developers. Furthermore, it became clear that Danielle wasn't just his lover. She actively assisted him in these criminal schemes, acting as a liaison between Jerome and his illegal partners. Police began to suspect that Danielle knew too much, and that could have been one of the reasons for her death. By mid-September, investigators began finding even more troubling evidence related to Jerome's business. It was revealed that many of the deals he had made were fraudulent, and part of the money was funneled through shell companies registered in Danielle's name. This information shocked not only the police, but also Monica, who had believed she knew everything about her husband's life. The police found numerous emails and messages between Jerome and Danielle discussing these schemes. These communications showed that their relationship was not only romantic, but also business-oriented. In one of the emails, Danielle suggested a way for Jerome to hide some of the profits through fake deals. This further strengthened the investigators' suspicions that Jerome had been using Danielle in his criminal operations. The psychological profile of Jerome, which began to form during the investigation, shocked everyone. It turned out that Jerome had not only manipulated both women in his personal life, but he had masterfully used Danielle to carry out his criminal schemes. Police began to suspect that Jerome had initially gotten involved with Danielle, not just out of romantic interest, but because she could help him with his illegal dealings. Jerome skillfully played on the emotions of both women, using them to achieve his goals. Monica provided him with stability and respectability in society, while Danielle was a tool for financial manipulation and risky deals. He used her professional skills and contacts to advance his illegal projects. As a result, both women were under his control, but each in a different way. When Monica began to suspect that something was wrong, Jerome intensified his psychological pressure on both women. He convinced Monica that her suspicions were baseless, while continuing to manipulate Danielle, telling her that their relationship would lead to a bright future. This double game allowed him to maintain control over both his family life and his shady business dealings. By the end of October, investigators finally gathered enough evidence to arrest Jerome on charges of fraud and involvement in criminal real estate schemes. These charges marked the end of his double life. He found himself at the center of a scandal that not only destroyed his career, but his entire life. Monica, upon learning about her husband's double life, was devastated. She couldn't believe that the man she thought she knew, the man she had lived with for so many years, had been playing such a dangerous and complicated game behind her back. Her life, just like Danielle's, had been shattered by Jerome's manipulations. In the end, the exposure of his schemes came as a shock to the entire East Central community. Jerome was not just a husband caught in an affair, but a man who destroyed the lives of two women while trying to maintain control over his illegal operations. In November 2012, the long-awaited trial for the murder of Danielle Green began. The court proceedings immediately attracted the attention of both local and national media. Murder, romantic intrigue, and Jerome's criminal dealings made this case a real sensation. Monica Harrison, charged with murder, and Jerome Harrison, charged with fraud and illegal real estate deals, were at the center of events that had completely destroyed their lives. From the very first days, it was clear that the trial would be filled with unexpected twists and revelations. Monica, charged with killing Danielle, claimed she acted in self-defense, but the prosecutors intended to prove that her actions were premeditated. Jerome, whose criminal schemes were being unearthed, found himself in a difficult position. He tried to distance himself from the events, placing the blame on Monica, claiming that she was emotionally unstable and acted out of jealousy and rage. During the first weeks of the trial, Jerome played on his image, the successful businessman, loving husband, and victim of a family conflict. His defense argued that he had been misled by Danielle, who had manipulated both him and Monica. Jerome tried to convince the jury that his only mistake was falling under Danielle's influence, and that he simply couldn't end the relationship in time. He denied the accusations of criminal schemes, claiming he had no knowledge of the illegal real estate deals and that Danielle had handled these transactions behind his back. However, the prosecutors presented evidence showing that Jerome was an active participant in these scams. Testimony from former business partners, found emails, and bank transactions pointed to his central role in orchestrating the financial schemes involving Danielle. These revelations cast doubt on his defense, and Jerome began losing control over his version of the events. In a key moment of the trial, Jerome attempted to shift the blame for the murder onto Monica. He claimed that Monica knew about his affair with Danielle, and that her intention to kill her rival was driven not only by jealousy, but also by fear for her own reputation. Jerome alleged that Monica had premeditated this confrontation to get rid of Danielle, and that her actions were not a response to a threat, but a calculated move. By December, the trial reached a new level as the psychological battle between Jerome and Monica became apparent. Monica's lawyers began actively arguing that she had been a victim of manipulation, not only by Danielle, but also by Jerome. Psychological experts called to testify confirmed that Monica's behavior at the time of the murder was the result of severe emotional stress and years of manipulation by Jerome. They argued that Jerome had skillfully created an atmosphere of control and fear in their marriage, suppressing Monica's personality and forcing her into a life filled with anxiety and mistrust. Monica, in her testimony, described how Jerome had deceived her for years, leading a double life. She recounted how, despite her suspicions, he always reassured her of his loyalty and devotion, all while hiding not only his affair with Danielle, but also his criminal dealings. Her emotional testimony moved many in the courtroom, and her lawyers worked to portray Monica as a victim who, acting in self-defense, was forced to kill Danielle. Jerome, finding himself in an increasingly difficult position, continued to try to present himself in the best light, but the jury began to lean more and more toward the idea that his version of events lacked credibility. Throughout the trial, the psychological tension between Jerome and Monica was palpable, each trying to shift the blame for what had happened onto the other. Ultimately, the fraud charges made Jerome a less credible witness, which affected his defense. By early 2013, the trial reached its climax. The jury was shocked by the numerous revelations. During the final arguments, both sides presented their versions of the events. Monica's defense focused on her emotional state and the manipulations of Jerome. Jerome's lawyers, in turn, attempted to discredit Monica, portraying her as a woman who had lost her mind and acted out of jealousy. The trial became a true psychological thriller, where the truth remained hidden beneath layers of lies, manipulations, and half-truths. However, the key moment came when the true extent of Jerome's involvement in the real estate scams was revealed. Prosecutors proved that Jerome had used Danielle for money laundering, further reinforcing their version that he hadn't been honest with either Monica or Danielle. At the end of the trial, the jury faced the difficult task of deciding who deserved a harsher punishment: Monica, who killed Danielle in an emotional outburst, or Jerome, who had manipulated both women for years to benefit from his shady dealings. On February 2, 2013, after weeks of court hearings, the jury delivered their verdict. The trial, filled with shocking revelations, plot twists, and the psychological game between Jerome and Monica finally came to a close. Opinions in the courtroom were divided. On one side, Monica, portrayed as a victim of manipulation, but still charged with brutal murder. On the other side, Jerome, a man whose financial scams and double life had been fully exposed, but who remained free of the main murder charge. When the judge read the verdict, the courtroom held its breath. Most expected Jerome to receive a significant sentence for his financial crimes, but the reality was different. Jerome was found guilty of fraud and involvement in illegal real estate schemes, but the court sentenced him to probation, which shocked many. Instead of prison, Jerome was given 3 years of probation and a hefty fine. His lawyers managed to convince the court that he had not been the primary mastermind behind the schemes, but rather a participant who had fallen under the influence of criminal partners. Monica, who was found guilty of the murder of Danielle Green, was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The court considered that her actions occurred in a state of emotional distress, but the prosecution argued that she acted not only in self-defense, but with a degree of intent. The verdict sparked an emotional response among those present. Many sympathized with Monica, seeing her as a victim in this complex story, but the court left no doubt about her guilt. After the verdict was delivered, a new suspicion arose. The police began reviewing Danielle's case. Some details that surfaced during the trial led investigators to suspect that her death might have been part of a larger conspiracy. It was discovered that in the last months of her life, Danielle had kept a journal in which she mentioned her role in Jerome's scams and her growing fear for her life. Investigators began to suspect that Jerome might have deliberately pushed Monica into killing Danielle, using her as a pawn in his game. All along, Jerome had skillfully manipulated both women, and his ultimate goal might have been to eliminate Danielle, who knew too much about his illegal activities. This twist added even more mystery to the case, although the evidence wasn't strong enough to reopen the case or charge Jerome with murder. A month after the verdict, in March 2013, Jerome suddenly disappeared. Despite being given a probation sentence and being required to stay under court supervision, Jerome withdrew all his money from his accounts and vanished without a trace. It happened almost overnight. No one knew where he had gone. The police tried to locate him but were unsuccessful. All of his assets were transferred to offshore accounts, leaving no clue as to where he might have fled. This disappearance dealt the final blow to Monica, who was behind bars. She realized that she had been a part of Jerome's elaborate game all along. Leaving her to face the consequences alone, Jerome had used the situation to save himself and disappear, leaving her in prison with a shattered life. Jerome's fate remained unknown, but speculation that he had started a new life abroad only fueled interest in the case. The East Central community was shocked by this outcome. Jerome, once seen as a respected businessman, was revealed not only to be involved in criminal schemes, but also to have betrayed his own family. His disappearance became a symbol of the collapse of the moral foundations on which the community had thought their lives were built. Monica, despite the support of friends and acquaintances, remained in prison, trying to come to terms with how her life had fallen apart so quickly. The story of Monica and Jerome became a topic of discussion for years to come, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and endless speculation about what really happened that fateful day and who the true culprit of the tragedy was. After Jerome's disappearance in March 2013, the residents of East Central were gripped by shock and disbelief. The community, which had admired the Harrisons for years, now found itself on the verge of complete disillusionment. People couldn't fathom that the man they had regarded as the ideal father, husband, and successful businessman had been a hidden criminal, manipulating everyone around him for his own gain. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some residents claimed that Jerome had never been the man he appeared to be. They recalled strange situations related to his business dealings that had once seemed insignificant. Now these events formed a complete picture. Jerome had been a man of double standards, using his position to deceive everyone. East Central was no longer the peaceful, friendly community it had once been. It had now become a symbol of shattered illusions and distrust. Soon after Jerome's disappearance, new investigations were launched by local and federal authorities. They sought more information about his criminal schemes and tried to figure out where he might have fled. As these investigations progressed, new details of his illicit activities came to light. It turned out that Jerome had not only been involved in financial fraud, but was also linked to illegal real estate dealings carried out through shell companies. His scheme was far deeper and more complex than what had been revealed during the trial. Some residents of East Central, upon learning this, began to withdraw their former support for Jerome. People who had once viewed him as a symbol of success and the realization of the American dream now saw him as a heartless manipulator. Jerome's secret life, which no one had suspected, destroyed the trust and respect he had once earned. Meanwhile, Monica, sitting in prison, began to realize that for all these years, she had merely been a pawn in Jerome's cunning game. Her life had fallen apart, and now she had plenty of time to reflect on how her husband had used her for his own ends. She felt betrayed and deceived. Every day in prison became a painful reminder of how different her life could have been if she hadn't fallen into Jerome's trap. Monica also began to understand that her actions, which had led to Danielle's murder, were not simply the result of jealousy, but a consequence of years of manipulation by Jerome. He had always skillfully controlled her emotions, steering them in the direction that suited him. Now, realizing the full extent of his game, she started contemplating revenge. Monica decided that when she got out of prison, she wouldn't let this go. Her revenge would be as cunning as Jerome's game had been. She would begin planning her own strategy to regain control over her life and prove that she would no longer be anyone's victim. Despite all the police's efforts, Jerome was never found. It was believed that he had fled abroad, using his connections and financial resources to start a new life. Some sources speculated that he had settled somewhere in Europe or South America, continuing his criminal dealings. His disappearance became a symbol of elusive justice. A man who had destroyed so many lives had managed to escape and avoid punishment. Even in his new surroundings, Jerome couldn't fully escape his old habits. He continued to exploit people, build new schemes, all the while hiding his true identity. Yet his name and his dark past had now become part of criminal lore. People who had known him still discussed his disappearance, trying to understand how he had managed to manipulate the lives of those around him so skillfully. The story of Jerome Harrison and his family remained a bitter lesson for the residents of East Central about how easily one could fall victim to a manipulator. Jerome left behind a trail of destruction, ruined lives, trust, and reputations. But for Monica, who was still behind bars, the story wasn't over. Her plan for revenge was taking shape, and she was ready for the day when she could walk free and reclaim control over her destiny.